Let me know. All right. You get to hear me yell at you in recording. What time you want to start? You want to start now? All right. It's a good time. Well, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Today, we're going to talk a lot about due diligence and what we're supposed to do, why we do it, how does it protect us, how do we reduce our liability? So it sort of builds a little bit off of yesterday's class. What's a little interesting to me, just being in the business for 27 years, I'm surprised how many times I hear people say that their agents don't do any due diligence at all. You know, and sometimes I hear this because I'll go into town hall and I literally will introduce my client to the person at town hall, and I'll tell them that we're here doing our due diligence. You know, obviously we'd rather find out information ahead of time rather than finding out too late. And they almost give you an immediate compliment. And they say, wow, that's wonderful. I wish my agent did that for me. And you know, as soon as you start to get those regular compliments, you're gonna really feel great about what you're doing. But I think I kind of alluded to this yesterday, and I said, you really want to be careful when you're doing your due diligence, not to do it for your client. You should do it with your client. What I'm referring to that is on the buyer side. Okay. The reason why I prefer that method is because it allows both of you to team up. You go into the town hall, you literally go into every single department, and you're introducing yourself over and over again, so you sound like a broken record. But the key behind doing it together is, first, it's not your word against somebody else's word. The second thing is you also have an opportunity for the buyer to ask rebuttal questions. Or maybe the buyer thinks of something that you didn't think of, or vice versa. So again, it's sort of looked at as it's a team effort. The reason why I actually started doing this in the first place was I took a certified buyer representative course, the CBR designation course. And this was probably a good 10 years into the business. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't realize how little I actually was doing for my clients until I took this particular class. And I was shocked, and I was almost afraid that I might have caused myself to get sued because there were so many things I didn't do. Thankfully, nobody ever did sue, and I didn't give them any reason to, but wow, like what an eye-opening that particular designation class was. And then as I began to go into the town halls, it became more evident that people were not doing this. Other agents were not doing what I was doing. One particular time I did the due diligence for my client, and this was a multifamily. And when I went into the building department, I had asked the building inspector for the jacket, or some refer to it as the field card, and you know, all the information pertaining to that property. And he brought the folder over and he left it on the table and he says, here you go. And he walks away. So I opened the folder and it was empty. There was literally nothing in the jacket whatsoever. So I said to him, I said, did all the paperwork follow on your way over to the counter? Like, what happened with the paperwork? This was a house built in 1900. So there was certainly plenty of time for things to, you know, have occurred at this property and would later be put into the jacket. And he says, nope, that's everything. What you see is what you get. I said, well, can you check the file in front of this file, the one behind? Maybe somebody misfiled paperwork. Nope, no, it's all in that file. I said, do you know what's in the file? And I opened it up. I said, nothing. Look. And I emptied it upside down. And he says, well, that's all we have. Yeah. So I said to him, is this a legal multifamily? And you know what his response was?
I don't know.
There's nothing in the file that suggests otherwise. There's nothing in the file at all. What do you mean nothing that suggests otherwise? So he says, well, I mean, there's nothing that suggests otherwise, so we have no reason to believe it's not. Okay, so I jotted down and I took some notes, and I thought, can I even go back to the buyer with this? Like, I just felt like, there's something wrong. And so I asked him a few other questions. Well, wouldn't you know, I call the buyer and I give him the information that the building inspector gave me. The buyer goes down to town hall himself, asks the same questions, and wouldn't you know, he got a different answer. They gave him a different answer. So I said, no more, no more, because it felt like I was being accused of lying when I had nothing to do with that at all. I was doing it for my client. So from that point forward, I said, you know what? The buyer's coming with me to do the due diligence. And if they don't want to come, then they don't want to do their own due diligence. So I would make them sign a waiver saying that they've waived their right to conduct a due diligence research with their agent. And then it said, you're welcome to do it on your own, but don't come after me. Don't look at me if something didn't come up. So I'm a big CYA person. I got a big butt to cover, so you got a big, CYA. Anyway, so let's go ahead and jump a little bit into the different things that you look for when you go into town hall. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see this? Yeah, okay. Perfect. So the first thing we're going to talk about, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this so you can all see. First thing we're going to talk about is what should the listing or buyer agent do? And when you think about due diligence, remember that it all really depends on how many hats you're wearing. Are you wearing the buyer hat? Are you wearing the seller hat? Are you a dual agent? So it really does depend on that situation. But when you look at the actual listing agent's responsibility, a listing agent needs to go into a market analysis with their eyes wide open. That's probably the best way I could describe that. And they don't need to dig, but they need to make themselves aware of the overall condition. So in other words, you don't have to go looking for problems, but you have to report problems that are open and obvious, right? When you're on the buyer side of it, you got to bring your shovel and you do have to start digging, right? You got to dig as deep as you can because you're trying to uncover as much as you can for your client. As you all know, Massachusetts does not require that the seller's disclosure form be filled out. Even though I disagree, it should be. The only obligation the seller has is to actually fill out the lead paint disclosure form. That's the only obligation in Massachusetts for the seller to do. But we as professionals, we as licensees have to cover our butt, right? We're subject to Chapter 93A of the Mass General Laws, Consumer Protection. And our requirement is to disclose any material fact or defect. So again, even though the seller doesn't fill out that form, what I like to do if they say they're not going to fill it out, and I like the form that Kathy showed us yesterday. The only little thing I think it's missing is I would write, I asked the seller, are you aware of any material fact or defect? And they said no. Because we're not relieved of the responsibility to ask that question and to document what the seller actually said. So I really think you need to make sure that you do that extra step. If you, yeah, that's what I would do. Because again, we're not required to get the seller disclosure form filled out. We are required to disclose any upfront known material fact or defect. Okay, so let's get a little bit deeper. Here's part of the problem is the agent, we actually are responsible for what we should have known. Okay, can you see it a little bit better now? Yeah, so we're responsible for what we should have known. Well, what does that mean? Like, what should I know? I'm a real estate agent. I took a 40-hour course and now I'm sitting through this extra training. I don't understand how heating systems work. I don't know electric. I don't understand plumbing. What's knob and tube? Most people don't know what these things are, so part of the problem is the onus is on us to take these classes to learn more about, what affects our industry. So when you go to a home inspection, you should almost be taking notes really closely and paying attention to what that inspector's telling you, because then you'll be able to identify what knob and tube wiring looks like. So that when you're doing your walkthrough down in the basement and you look up and you see obvious signs of it, you'll then know to say to the seller, is this live knob and tube, or has it been disconnected? Those are the types of things, you look at a roof. I find myself, I don't know if you guys do this or not, I find myself driving down the street looking at people's roofs. I'm not a roofer. I don't have any desire to change anyone's shingles, but I just find my eyes always going to these certain points because I'm always trying to figure out, all right, how do I cover myself? Okay. But what should you have known? That's onus is on us. So we have to sort of figure out, what should I have known? Like, should I have known that the pool did not have a permit? Yeah. Should I have known that the addition or the deck was put on without a permit, or they opened a permit, but it was never closed? Yeah, you should know those things. The problem is they don't provide that training in real estate school. The training is provided like it is here online or in person. So let's go a little bit deeper and figure out, what is it exactly that you should have known? If you're walking through someone's property and you see that there's a stain on the ceiling, are you just going to walk by and assume that that stain has been remedied and it's been fixed? Or are you going to stop and look up and say, what happened here? Believe it or not, that's what we need to do. We need to actually surmise, is this a problem? Has it been corrected? Do I need to disclose it, or is it no longer an issue? This is our due diligence as listing agents, okay? You're bringing a buyer in to see your property and you see the same thing. Your buyer's going to look up and say, oh, they have a problem with their air conditioning. You don't want to say, oh, I'm sure it's fine. You have no idea. You have to inquire. That's something you should have known, okay? What was the lawsuit you were talking about the other day that Jason's? Several. The one with the disclosure form.
The lead paint or so one of them is escrow, get sued for that. One of them is the knob and tube.
Knob and tube, okay. Yeah, so what's interesting about the knob, what's interesting about the knob and tube here is there's multiple layers of liability. Should the agent have known? So that's one question. That's why we're probably being named in the suit. Second question is, what happened with the seller? Did they write on their seller disclosure form that they had knob and tube? Did they purposely exclude that information? So that's the second point. What liability does the seller have? And the fact that the seller said that there was no knob and tube, did they guess, or did they really know there was knob and tube? And then what about the home inspector?
Yeah.
Did he miss that? He or she, did they miss that? Did they test? Did the inspection report say, look further into it, hire a electrician? So there's all these layers of possible liability. And the only way we're going to protect ourselves is to do our due diligence. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of that due diligence. It actually boils down to something initially as simple as pulling a copy of the deed. All right. Why pull a copy of the deed? This is where you guys respond. Why do you pull a copy of the deed? Let me know what you think.
To see who owns the house, to see if there's any easements, those kind of things.
Exactly. Exactly. So you want to basically do your due diligence before you go and get into your market analysis. You want to find out, what is it that they actually own? How do they actually own it? Are there any easements, as you were saying, Amanda? Are there any rights of ways? Are there any deed restrictions? You don't know any of that unless you pull a copy of the deed. Naturally, you're not going to pull a copy of the deed for every showing you have, but once you get to the point where you're going to write an offer, you should already have that information so that you can, deliver that over to the buyer if you're on their side. If you're on the seller side, you're going to impress upon the seller how much due diligence you did, because you already know they have an easement. You already know they have deed restrictions. So there's a lot of things that you're going to be telling the seller you already know about. So that's going to make you look even better when you're doing your presentation. Okay. We also want to find out, are the people sitting in front of me actually the true owners? How do we do that? Do you have your license? Do you have a photo ID? I actually know there was a couple, thankfully this had nothing to do with me personally, but I became very aware of this story. This particular couple hired an agent to sell their home. The agent never looked up the deed, never actually even ID'd the people. The agent made the assumption that the two people in front of them saying they wanted to sell were actually the owners. So the agent signed the listing agreement, marketed the property, promoted it, received an offer, put it under contract, and it actually went to closing. Would you believe that only one of the people were the true owners?
Mhm.
The woman was actually the girlfriend. Now, the husband and wife who owned the property, the wife was away on business on an international trip. And the girlfriend that had been dating with this gentleman actually forged the
Oh,
signature,
jeez.
and she got a fake ID.
Awesome.
They signed the deal, got the check, and took off. 3 months later, the wife, the unsuspecting wife, comes back from her international trip only to find someone living in her home. And it wasn't anyone she knew. So she literally was to the point where she thought, how could this possibly happen? How is it even possible for this to happen? Well, it was a fraudulent transaction. But my point though is, had this agent photo ID'd the individual, what would have happened? They would have said, oh, you're not the actual seller. And they never would have listed the property. It never would have gone through this. Now, do you think there was liability on the agent's part? Yeah. And what do you think the court said? You should have known. Why should you have known? Well, because it's not unreasonable that you know the people who are signing your contracts are actually the people they say they are. So this particular agent got in a lot of trouble. I think they might have even lost their license and their house because of the fact that they didn't take any reasonable care of their client. The attorney was covered because he photo ID'd them and they produced a sufficient license. Okay. The other thing you want to know is, are they an authorized seller? If you pull a copy of the deed and you see the property's in a trust, let me ask you all, what do you think you need a copy of?
The trust.
The trust. Why do you need a copy of the trust, Jim? What would you think?
So you know that they're authorized to sign for the trust.
Yeah, so you know who the trustee is, who's authorized. Well, that's the other problem. Just because they're named as trustee doesn't mean they have the authority to actually sell real property. So you don't know this unless you read the trust document. Okay. So if you didn't pull a copy of the deed, you don't know that it's in a trust. I actually had a beneficiary of a trust try to sell his property. He said, well, I own it. I said, well, technically you don't. He wasn't very happy for me to tell him that. But at the end of the day, he was simply the beneficiary. He benefited from the proceeds of the sale, but he had no control. He didn't technically own it. His mother was the trustee. And the trust document specifically said he couldn't have access to the proceeds until he was at least 21 years of age. He was 18. He was about 3 years early. And I think he knew this, but he tried to pull a fast one. So these little details can truly save you your client as well as your brokerage from spending gazillions of dollars and trying to defend themselves, okay? The other thing that the deed tells us is how did the people take title? What type of rights are there? If you have husband and wife and one is recently deceased, well, we all know from real estate class that there's different ways you can take title, and each way has a different means of how the property passes. Does it automatically go to the surviving heir? Does it transfer to the deceased according to their will? There's so many little facets that you have to get involved in. Now, we're not attorneys, so
That's why we
yeah.
love buyer attorneys.
right, we're not attorneys, but we
Yeah.
have to identify a situation come up that we can say, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Attorney, I now need you to step in and tell me what's going on, okay? These are the little simple things. Estate sales, you get somebody who's passed away and there is no sole survivor. Now you're dealing with an estate sale. Okay, hopefully you have a estate attorney who's representing the deceased and their estate. I've been involved in situations where the people tried to do it themselves. It was an absolute mess. Unbelievable. I remember the will gave this person the power to do anything they wanted. This is what it said in the will. I give my personal representative the power to do anything they want. Do you think the attorneys were happy when they read that? They're like, well, what does that really mean? Like, can you sell real estate? Can't you? So that's one of the problems when you have somebody who dies and they make up their own will, you know, and is it even suitable? Is it going to help? If you have someone who's passed, you need to make sure that the personal representative has been appointed by probate court. If they haven't been appointed, well, then nobody has authorization to sell the property. Or is it going to be an administrator that's appointed because there is no will or there was no power to sell? So again, we don't need to be lawyers. We don't need to go through the law books, but we have to identify this is a great time to get an attorney involved and let them tell me, do we have the proper authorizations to even be able to sell this property, or do we really not? We need to wait and do other things, okay? Incidentally, a lot of folks don't realize that you have to disclose that you have an estate sale in the MLS. Now, let me ask, does anybody know why there's a requirement for you to disclose that there's an estate sale? Any thoughts?
Yeah.
So with an estate sale, the personal representatives are required to get the most money possible for the estate. You have to disclose in MLS it's an estate sale because even if you have a signed contract, we're still obligated to present all future offers up until the date of closing. If a higher offer comes in, the estate has an obligation, a fiduciary obligation to consider the higher offer right up until the moment of closing. So sometimes I've been involved in estate sales where the attorneys that know what they're doing, they put that language in there that says there is a possibility that you may not actually get the property. You know, if a higher offer comes in or better terms, then the brokerage is required to present that offer, and then the representative of the estate is required to take it into consideration. All right, so that's something you really want to be familiar with, because you don't want to say to your buyer client, oh, you're good to go, we've got a signed P&S, when there could be that little caveat that would prevent the sale from going together. So just give that some thought, you know.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So if that situation came up and a better offer came in, would the person who was already under contract have the ability to amend their offer, or?
Yeah.
So would they have right of first refusal, or?
No, they wouldn't have first right of refusal, but they would have the same opportunity to increase their offer and improve their terms, because it's the obligation on the personal representative is just to do what's best for the estate. All right. Now, what's interesting is some attorneys, because I've done quite a few estate sales, some attorneys, even though that's what the law is and what they're supposed to do, some attorneys don't act that way.
Yes, the ones that I know are not acting that way.
No, right, but they're supposed to.
Okay,
Yeah. So, and a lot of them that do that won't put that additional language in there.
right. I've never seen
It's
that.
almost like if you don't see the language, then you know how they're going to
Right.
treat it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So you got to kind of think of those things. So it's almost like when you purchase a property. I'm going to skip out of order for a second. Well, I'm going to mention foreclosures in a moment, but let's talk about a license to sell. So if somebody dies without a will, then there's a license to sell requirement. What does that mean? It means that they have to petition the court, the probate court, to get permission to actually sell the property. But you have to get permission for a particular sale. So you're not going to just get a license to sell to put it on the market. You actually have to get a bona fide offer accepted and then submit that petition for license to sell to the probate along with a copy of that purchase and sale agreement. And in that agreement, it's going to say subject to obtaining a license to sell from probate. So it's a contingency that probate is going to require in order for them to say, no, this offer is not good enough. We don't feel it represents the fair market value, which doesn't do our deceased, any good. So that's the point, is if there's no will, then probate has to approve the actual sale price. Now, let's say that they do approve the sale price. If that sale were to ever fall through and they put it back on the market again, you would not have to apply for a new license to sell as long as you got the same price or better. But if you get less, then you have to resubmit for a brand new license to sell. Okay. So again, this is a 4 to 6 week time frame. This can hold up your closing 4 to 6 weeks. So you need to know what's going on. All right. When you're dealing with the short sale, we as agents, as list agents, we have to do our due diligence. My timer, thank you. With the due diligence, the question is, okay, does the bank even know that the homeowner is looking to do a short sale? And if the seller says, well, I haven't called the bank yet, well, that's the first thing you want them to do, is to contact the bank and see, will they even consider a short sale? And if the short answer is no, because they don't always, then you're out of business. You just, don't bother wasting your time. But if they say, yes, the bank is willing to do a short sale, thank you. If the bank is willing to do a short sale, then great, you can go ahead and move forward, but you still need to put a contingency saying subject to short sale approval. Okay. So again, you're doing your due diligence. If I get the seller to sign the dotted line, is this going to go to closing and am I going to get my paycheck? That's what you got to be thinking. And of course, along the way, am I protecting my client? Right? Because that's certainly number one. When you're dealing with a short sale, you also need to realize, some of you who don't know the term, a short sale simply means that it's a short payoff. Okay, so the payoff is more money than the property is actually worth. I'll scoot over too.
Packed house.
Yeah, packed house, right? All right. So the short sale means that I owe more money on my mortgage than it's actually worth. So now you've got to get the bank to approve that. And there's a process. It takes time. So again, you're adding another probably, 3 weeks, if not 6 weeks, to the process of closing. When you're dealing with a foreclosure sale, a bank owned, I don't want to use the word because it's kind of a swear, but it's a blank show, if you know what I'm saying. Like, you have no idea whether the bank's going to do things the way that the last time you did a foreclosure, because every bank is different. And not only is the bank different, but within the same bank, the same departments operate differently. And they have this addendum that they make you sign that basically says that you can't sue them. They know nothing about the property. And there's all kinds of terms and conditions that you need to make your buyer aware that if they don't comply exactly to that contract, the bank is going to keep their money. And they will keep their money. All right. So you just have to be aware of these things. You've got to read all of the agreements. All right. When you're looking at reloads, corporate reloads, they often require there be a buyout. Well, so some corporate reloads involve a buyout, some don't. You just need to be familiar with the parameters of their program if you ever work with a client who is a corporate reload. The commission can be affected. Oftentimes they charge a referral fee, so that's going to take money out of your pocket. So if that's the case, you want to make sure you reflect your compensation in the MLS accordingly so that you're not getting paid less than the other side. Okay, so we've got to kind of keep that in mind. And then Amanda, you already talked about easements and rights of ways. Those are things that you need to know. You know, as a buyer agent, you should be digging that up. As a listing agent, you should be disclosing that. The buyer agent shouldn't be surprised when they see that the property has an easement. And then when you refer to restrictive covenants or deed restrictions, again, you have to look at that deed to figure out whether you're protected or not. Okay. So let's go to the town hall. Is anybody, I know some of you have your windows up and some of you are showing, but does anybody do this? I'm just curious. Is anybody currently visiting town hall and checking out everything?
I always go, and every time I walk into town hall, they
Yeah.
always seem like surprised to see me. And I always wonder if anybody
Right.
else goes, because
Exactly.
I walked into Peabody Town Hall yesterday or 2 days ago, and they all huffed and puffed and were so annoyed that I was in there.
You were
They're
making
not-
it work.
a lot
You
of
made it
times
work.
you're not the friendliest bunch, and you kind of have to do your best with them. But it's so shocking to me that people don't go into town hall, because the things that I have kind of learned just by the extra chatter
Yeah.
have been like, wow, I can't believe that I wouldn't have known that if I didn't go into town hall.
Right.
You know, Amanda, I love the same thing you just said. They are so surprised. And I don't know if they've ever complimented you or not, but usually I get that compliment. I almost want to just say, you know, I'm Scott Gordon. I'm here with my client. We're doing our due diligence, and then immediately turn my shoulder for them to pat me, because it's almost like a given. They almost come right out with it and compliment you. And they're doing it in front of your client, which makes you look like a rock star. Right?
Except in Peabody, they weren't having.
Except in Peabody. Yeah. Just, you know, avoid the Peabody town hall.
It's
They
really,
don't
it is town specific, because I think some towns are happy that the realtors are coming in,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
then others would rather just get emails. But again, I prefer to be there in person, because, and I kind of, the conservation agent at Peabody said, you know, kind of was like, why are you here? And then said, here's my card, so in the future you can email me. And I said, so you don't want me to come in here? And she's like, oh, no, you can come in, but it's probably easier for you if you just email me.
No, it's not.
Yeah. It's funny how people are, you know, they just, I mean, come on, you know, you're in a public service. Can anybody see, Kate, can you see if there's any questions? I see there's a couple of comments.
I got Amanda.
Kate, you're still on mute.
I took care of Amanda's.
Oh, you
Sorry
took care
about,
of
sorry
it.
about that. Kathy answered it. Yes.
I got it.
Kathy, it's okay. Thank you. Thank you, guys. All right. So hopefully you're going into a town hall that welcomes you with open arms. If they don't, you plow through and you just still got to do what you got to do. Again, I highly recommend you bring your client with you. Don't do this on your own, guys, because the whole he said, she said, it's going to come back and bite you in the butt. And if the client does not care enough to do the due diligence with you, then get them to sign a waiver and just say, you know what, I'm not going to go and put my butt on the line if you don't even care. The last thing I'd want to see happen to you all is what happened to me, where my client thought I lied to them, and I certainly did not. All right, so you definitely want to check with the building department, see what the legal use is of the property. Even though it might be currently used as something, doesn't mean that's actually the legal use of that property. All right, you could have a residential property that's set up as a multifamily, and it looks like a multifamily, but it might not actually be a legal multifamily. You know, so you've got to go and you've got to talk to the people who can tell you, yes, this is a legal multi. No, it's not. All right. And it doesn't matter, by the way, how the property is assessed, because they're going to assess it based on its use. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the legal way you can actually use the property. Permits, when we all look in the jacket or the folder, you're going to see, hopefully, permits that were taken out against that property. Just know this, guys, the permit has to be signed off on and closed. More often than not, the permits are open and have not even been re-inspected, and the permit has never been closed out. So you might go and think that they pulled a permit, and yes, they did, but was the permit actually signed off on? Is everything fine? More often than not, I find that the permits are still open. And once the work was completed, they never invited the building inspector back down to verify the work was done right. If you ask the building inspector, why didn't you just go on your own? Well, their answer is a lot of people pull permits and they never do the work. Exactly. So you've got to go through each permit and make sure that it was signed off on, and it shows you that the inspections were done in the proper order. Okay. Again, do this with your clients. One of my clients, he actually had a pool house, a very elaborate, his pool house was bigger than my house. He spent 275 grand on this pool house. It was a sweet pool house. Yeah, yeah. So this guy was meticulous. He got a permit for everything except for the pool house.
Oh, jeez.
So he says to me, when I asked him, are you aware of any material factor defect? Well, I can't remember if I got a permit on the pool house. I laughed. I said, come on. I go, you know, you didn't get a permit. You got a permit for a dishwasher being removed and reinstalled. Don't tell me that you didn't remember. So I went down to town hall and I did my due diligence, and wouldn't you know, he never pulled a permit. So we made that disclosure when I made it in the MLS as well as in the contracts. All right. The buyer who bought it was a builder. He said, I don't care about that.
Right, most people don't care.
Yeah, which is okay, but
Yeah.
we disclosed it,
Yeah.
right? We took the liability off of us.
Yeah.
I said it in the MLS. It was written in the offer, written in the P&S. The attorneys were aware of it. Nobody was hiding anything. Never heard a word.
Yeah.
Okay. So like Kathy was saying, a lot of times the buyers just don't care. You know, people often will build a shed, they'll finish their basements, or they'll renovate a room, and they don't pull permits. And again, most buyers don't care. But here's the problem. You don't want to say to the buyer, oh, it's grandfathered. Don't worry about it. Because if the building inspector ever gets tipped off and does not like you or the buyer, they have the right to come back in that property and figure out what was happening, what was done, and they can force the individual to either get a permit or worse, to take it down. Whatever the structure was. What was the structure?
I built a pergola.
Oh, and they make you take it
It
down?
was right on the property line. Wow. They made me take it down.
I mean,
The house.
usually they're nicer, but
The house next door got sold.
yeah.
and The new buyer, they move in. They're like, I don't know, because then they call the building department.
Ooh, oh, the neighbors squealed on you.
And
Oh, yeah,
my goodness. Yep,
yeah.
I had to take it down.
yeah. You're lucky it was only a pergola. If
It
you
was
had
a
a,
nice pergola.
yeah, if you had like an expensive deck or, you
No, it
know,
was poured concrete.
oh,
slab.
okay,
Oh,
wow,
no, yeah,
wow.
so listen to him.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's you just don't know what you're gonna get. So don't ever say to your buyer, "Oh, I'm sure it'll be fine," or "It's gonna be grandfathered," because that's not always the case.
I wasn't a realtor then, just full disclosure.
Oh, okay, yeah. Kathy's
I
fully
didn't have a
disclosing.
license
She
at that point. I didn't
she
have
was
a
not
license.
licensed. Yep, yep. Good to know. Good to know. All right. So another thing is a lot of times the buyers will say, "Can I build a garage? Can I put in a pool?" Well, you can go to the building department and ask that question. What's the likelihood you're going to get approval? But they're never going to give you the carte blanche. "Oh, you'll be fine. Don't worry." They're not going to give you approval either.
Right.
So you've got to make your buyer aware of that. Okay, well, if they're there with you and you asked the question and the inspector said, "Well, you shouldn't have a problem," now they know what the response was. It's not you saying you should be fine. Okay. We need to be the source of the source. In Massachusetts, pay very close attention to this. If you do not identify a source, you're it. You are the source unless you identify otherwise. That honest to God truth, which is why you can get in a lot of trouble. All right. So when you're in your MLS and you're making your disclaimers, make sure that if the seller says they never had water, seller says they never had water. You never make a statement without identifying the source. And if you don't have a source, don't say it. Right? All right, repairs, improvements that are required for permits. Again, you could ask the individual building inspector, if I change up my dishwasher, am I gonna have to get a permit, or are you guys gonna look the other way? Every town's different. You just gotta find out what they consider to be a permanent issue and what's not. Surveys, you could look in the building department folder, you could look at the subject property as well as the abutting neighbors. All right, you might even be able to get a free survey if the neighbors have had work done. Because if a survey is in their file, then chances are they've identified your exact property lines as abutters, and you may very well get, a simple survey, if you will. So that's not a bad idea. Try to, look at the other folders. Yeah, look to exactly behind you, to left to right. Exactly. What are the setback requirements? If you're going to put up a fence, do I have to put it up, or a pergola? Do I have to be 10 feet back, 20 feet? What's the idea? And obviously, if you need an exception to be made, you can apply for a variance, but you just want to tell the buyer what's the requirement. Okay. Is the property in a historic district? Well, the only way you're going to know is to call the historic society or the historic department in the town and figure out whether the property is a registered historic property, right? One of my good friends actually had a home that was not in a historic district, but the homeowner prior to her put the property in a historic society. And it was in a deed attachment. So she was subject to that forever. There were 60 some odd pages of restrictions on what she couldn't do with her property. Now, the prior owner got a significant tax benefit, but this woman who had an issue, she got no benefit. In-laws, is it a legal in-law? The other piece of that is, if this client moves, will they allow it to be for the next client? Because some towns, literally, it needs to be a relative that's going to live in this accessory apartment. So you've really got to ask those questions.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Everyone's looking for in-laws.
Everyone's looking for in-laws. Is it a legal in-law? Yeah. You don't want to state in the MLS that you have a legal in-law just because the seller said it is. I'd go verify and make sure it is. Okay.
I
Yeah,
think
because the sellers,
in some towns you have to have, like, in some towns it doesn't automatically ever transfer. You have to reapply.
you have to reapply. Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if you can ever say it's a legal in-law. I think don't you have to say potential in-law or something like that? I don't know.
That's what I would say.
That's what I would say, but you know what? Every
Yeah.
time you read the MLS, it says in-law.
In-law,
Just like it
yeah.
is stated that
Yeah.
it is, and could not.
Yeah, in-law, just saying in-law is like a fact.
Right.
Yeah, potential is always going to cover you. All right, so we've got to go into the zoning department and we want to figure out what are the permitted uses for this property? Is it residential? Is it mixed use? Do we have commercial zoning? There could be multiple uses that are permitted for this property. But you need to do your homework. You need to figure this out before you go and start to, you know, fill in the MLS and start to answer questions about permitted uses. You know, sometimes people will say, I want to have a home office, or I'm an attorney, or I'm a real estate broker, and I just want to know, you know, what type of business could I use this property for? You know, and you don't have to know the answer to everything either. You can be, again, the source of the source. Well, you know, I don't know the answer to that, Mr. Buyer, but if I were you, I would go down to the zoning department and, you know, inquire. If you're their buyer's agent, well, then you take them by the hand and bring them down to the zoning department. The zoning board of appeals, if there's permitted use that you want to have appealed, people can make application for that and be heard as to whether they're going to be permitted that use or are they not. Okay. So go to these departments face to face. I don't recommend doing the phone calls. I just think that's a little difficult. You get someone's attention. They're standing right in front of you. They're looking face to face with you. I think you're going to get a lot more out of that. And I know Kathy said in her email, wouldn't you be surprised what people share with you at town hall? These people at town hall, they are like
No filters.
no filters, but they seem to know everybody's business too, you know, and you tell them an address. Oh, I know whose property that is. And
They're proud of it.
they really
They're
are.
proud of the
Yeah.
information.
And then they just can't stop talking. Now, if you're on the listing side, you almost want to block your
You don't
ears.
wanna
And
know.
yeah. But if you're on the buy side, you're like, oh, what? So tell me some more. What else do you know? You know, so it really is interesting how you have to look through the vision of a realtor's eyes and say, okay, do I really want to dig, or do I just need a little bit of information in order to cover my butt? When you get to short-term rentals, I learned this trick the hard way. I had a client who called me and said they wanted to rent their house out on a weekly rental for the summer. So what do? I assumed, we all know what that means. I assumed that she was permitted to do that. The zoning would allow it. So I had my sign company install a sign. Next thing you know, the neighbor, because you know one of the neighbors ended up calling the zoning department and the building inspector. And they sent me a fax. And then I got the phone call, and then I got a letter a couple days later. They were going to fine me like $200 a day if I continued to market this property as a short-term rental. So I didn't even wait for the sign guy to go get the sign. I went down there myself and pulled that thing out of the ground because I didn't want it to worry. Same thing with Airbnbs. You know, this is a huge trend right now. A lot of people are doing these types of rentals. Check the zoning to make sure if it's even permitted. In many towns, it's not. You know, so the seller may very well have to be the one that does it themselves if they insist on doing it. You know, because it's their property, they're the property owner. So just really be careful, guys, because this can get ugly quick. All right, and $200 a day for your sign being out there it's going to add up. So when you go visit the town clerk's office, what do you want to ask the town clerk? I mean, ask them anything you want to ask. They'll surely tell you that's not my department, you know, or yeah, oh, you're gonna have to go down to zoning. The other thing, guys, is know this, but the town halls, they have like the best work hours
They do.
ever.
Be careful.
You know, they work like 2 hours a day. You know, they get Monday,
No
Wednesday,
offense to
Friday
anyone
off.
on the call whose family member
Yeah.
might work at town hall.
My mother was assistant town clerk, so I have the right to.
You have the right to say.
Yeah. She's no longer with us right now, but she'd be agreeing. They have great hours. But my point here is that really you want to find out as much as you can about the property and the area. If your people have animals or they're planning on having a dog licensed, you ask the questions, what are my requirements as a resident in town? Do I have to pay a dog license fee? How much is the fee going to be? What about town meetings? When do you hold your town meetings? Hopefully you guys are all members of the community, that you go to your town meetings, that you actually vote in the town that you have the right to vote in. Where are the locations? Are they separated into districts? These are just little pieces of information that you want to have. Some folks are interested in the town's budget. And believe it or not, if you're a taxpayer, you should be interested in the budget. Why? Well, because if it's got a very poorly run town budget, chances are your taxes are going to continue to increase. And you can also check and find out whether they have. You can go to the treasurer's office to see whether the increases are consistent. How much do they go up or do they go down? But when you look at this annual town report, it's going to tell you every department what their budget is. Article 2 budget, which is basically the entire town. How common do they vote overrides? If they do overrides all the time, that's something you want to be aware of as a buyer, because your taxes are going to go up all the time. So these are just some general questions you want to ask. If you're interested in getting married, believe it or not, you can get a marriage license at town hall, at the clerk's office. If you need a death certificate or a birth certificate, you can get, or a gun. Yeah, there's many different things. My mother was assistant town clerk, and she had her justice of the peace license.
There you go.
So my mother would marry all kinds of people. So
Get married, license your dog, get a gun.
get a
What
gun.
else
Yeah.
is there? Beach sticker.
Beach
Oh, a
sticker. There you
beach
go.
sticker, right.
Yeah. Do I need a beach sticker?
Yeah.
How much is a beach sticker
Trash,
for?
trash.
Track. We're gonna get to that.
Oh, that's not-
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yep. DPW is gonna be dealing
Oh,
with
that's right.
trash. All right, but let's go into the Board of Health office. You're not gonna think that there's a lot for you to do with the Board of Health, but there's
Oh
plenty.
my God, too much.
Too much, yeah. If the property's not on city sewer and you're gonna have a private septic, well, then they should have all the pumping records. They should have the actual as-built plans of the septic system. If there's ever been a Title V inspection done, the Board of Health gets a copy of it. All right, so why does this matter? Well, you want to look at the Title V report. You want to look at the as-built plan. Was it certified a 4-bedroom or is it a 3-bedroom?
Right.
You don't want to look and see, well, there's 4 bedrooms in the house. Well, how many bedrooms is the septic?
Right, and that's so important when you're working with people that are telling you they want to put on an addition.
Yeah,
Well, guess what? It's only a 3-bedroom
It's all-
septic or whatever.
right,
Yeah.
right. All right, so again, this is our due diligence. Private wells, if you're interested in having well water because you like to garden and you don't want to pay the crazy fees to the town. Was the well certified? How deep is the well? How big is the well? Who installed the well? If anything needs to be done to the well, it's a good idea to call the installer. You can look at the plans for the well.
When an owner has tests done on the well, like,
Yeah.
Minerals, whatever, deposits, all that stuff, is that
They're supposed to report it,
the contractor doing the work or
Yeah.
the owner?
the contractor.
Okay.
Just like when you
So
get
if
your,
there's high levels of arsenic, high levels of all
yeah,
that.
they're supposed to report all
Okay.
that. Yeah. Same thing with like your septic. If you pump out your septic tank,
Right,
they're supposed to send the pumping record to the actual Board of Health.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a lot of information there.
so you're supposed to pump your system
Yeah.
every 2.5. What's
Well,
the deal
2
there?
years is recommended.
Right,
If you're talking about Title V, if you pump it every year, then your Title V can get extended up to 3 years.
okay.
So you don't want to pump it too often, though. That's another issue.
It's poking the bear.
Yeah, so 2 years tends to be the recommended time frame to pump your system.
Okay.
You want to ask if there's been any neighborhood complaints. Believe it or not, Board of Health related complaints. My first home, my wife and I didn't realize this, but the house next to us had like 90 cats removed
Oh.
from the house. She was the cat lady. I mean, she had 90 removed, but she had more than I could count that they actually allowed her to have. You know, so I had to think, well, is this something that a dog could easily rectify? Or yeah, like so our German Shepherd had some fun chasing cats. And I apologize for any cat lovers out there. I don't mean any harm or ill will to your cats. You know, if there's super funds, Kathy was talking about that the other day. If you have a super fund site, how close is that to the subject property? Was there any contaminated soil? Was there any spills nearby? So again, the Board of Health agent, there's someone who you don't want to just run in there for 2 minutes and run out. You want to try to ask them as much as you can. You could even get deeper into it and ask them about COVID. You could say, hey, do you have any information you can share with me that's public as it related to COVID and how the town reacted, or, you know, any stats like that you might be interested in. So,
Can I ask one question again, going back to the private wells?
sure.
Because I think that a lot of people, and I always get a little confused too when I'm doing like Boxford and those places that have the private wells. What
Yeah.
exact tests are we supposed to be thinking about? Oops, sorry, dog barking, for our clients? I know there's like, there's flow rate, that's important. Obviously we want to know what the depth is.
Potability.
What other things should we be having tested? Obviously the quality.
Quality, yeah. Potability. You want to make sure I can drink the water. You also want to check it for radon levels, believe it or not. Radon actually does go into water. So, and any other, hazardous chemicals that might have been spilled that entered their way into the groundwater.
And by the way, if you're dealing with these things during home inspection, do not leave these till the 11th hour. These
Yeah,
things take
exactly.
time. Like
Yeah.
these are the things you want to book immediately to get these
Right.
people in to do these tests.
Yep. Yeah, and make sure that you're not doing the test yourself. Make sure it's somebody who knows what they're doing. Because they come out and they have to sterilize the surface before they take a sampling of water, put it in a sealed container to make sure it's not violated, or that there's no issues with the sampling. Then they send it off to the proper lab that's going to give them a return with a report. I think the best way to answer your question though, Amanda, is that you really just want to call a well testing company and ask them to do whatever type of test any consumer that's going to drink and use that water would want to use. Like I have a private well at my property and we have a very high iron content. You can drink the water. I mean, that's part of, I know a lot of you people think I like to eat food and that's why I'm heavier, but I have a lot of iron. At least that's Iron Man. Yeah, that's the excuse.
That's your new term.
Yeah, the Iron Man. So that's my new excuse as to why I gained weight over COVID. So my point though is that you want to, as Kathy indicated, you want to make sure that you're getting enough time and building in the contingency. If you run out of time on your inspection or your due diligence period, request an extension because you need to find out the results of these reports before you're going to proceed forward.
And the other thing that comes to mind as everybody continues to waive home inspections, think about all the stuff you are waiving now, guys.
Right.
Like if this is, doing it today's class is just such a reminder of everything.
Absolutely.
So when you're waiving your home inspection and say you've got wells and septics and all of that, how do you protect your client for these things? Do you try to not waive your due diligence? I don't know, but it's something you really need to think about. If I move into a house with a well and I have flow issues and I can't take a shower, I'm going to be furious.
One strategy you could employ is you could make the inspection for informational purposes. And then if the buyer finds something that they don't like, worst case, they lose their $500 to $1,000 deposit.
You need to think about it.
Yeah. It's a good point.
Just think about it.
Good point. All right. So when we travel over to the assessor's office, there's a lot of information here. The couple of different terms, you know, you can do a lot of these searches, by the way, at the assessor's office online. Most of the assessor's offices have some sort of software program that allow you to get information from the field card or the jacket. But you can really do a better job if you go in person, as we're suggesting. And again, when you get face to face with someone, they're going to tell you a lot more than if you were on the phone. All right. So I can't stress enough. It's really better to do that. Don't get lazy and rely on the internet or the websites to give you the information. You know, do yourself a favor. So the assessor's office is going to allow you to basically look up whatever you need to know about the property. What's the assessed value? What was the history of assessed values? Are they going up? Are they going down? If you see every year that this is a substantial increase or decrease, then you just want the buyer to know that their taxes are going to be affected just the same as their assessed values have. If you're looking to check out the lot itself, what shape is this lot? Is it square? Is it round? Is it a triangle? Is it a, you know, I don't know, is it a diamond? I mean, there's all sorts of different shapes. You know, you could have a lot that's very simple and you could look at it and probably say, all right, I know that's probably the lot lines. We don't want to guess, right? You always want to have a plot plan. The better thing to have would be an actual survey, so you have the exact dimension. A plot plan is great in the absence of a survey, but don't rely on the plot plan either, because it's only an estimate of the actual property lines and the footage. Okay, but you look up a property, it's going to give you a map, a specific map number, and it's going to give you a block and a lot number. That would allow you to actually go over to their library of books or ledgers, and you could pull it down based on the numbers and open up to a particular page and actually be able to locate the particular lot so that you can see approximately how much frontage does it have, you know, what shape is it, and also be aware of the neighboring properties or the abutters to see what's happening. So it's a step worth doing. You know, but don't rely on all of these records too, especially the assessor's records. I'm not really sure why their data is not as accurate as it really should be. But oftentimes we'll go into MLS and we'll pull up the public records that are in MLS, and it will say the square footage is 1,652 square feet. But you might actually have more. You might have 1,800 or 1,900, or you could have less. Usually it's off, meaning it's less than it really is. But really, we need to do our own measurements, guys. You
I
know?
would actually hire a company.
Yeah, I mean, that's a better way to do
Don't
it.
do it yourself.
Yeah.
And there are dimensions, floor plans, someone that does that.
Yeah.
And get your floor plans done at the same time.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I mean, the MLS now allows us to put 15.9, you know, so you can demonstrate the inches, where before you had to estimate up, and you know how the rooms have all kinds of jogs and little crooks and nannies. So it's a great idea to hire a company. Yeah. Let them go in there and do their measurement as well as the floor plan. Any questions on anything? I know I've been throwing a lot at you, but any other questions or thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, we're halfway through.
A little over halfway. All right.
You got
I like
53
having
minutes.
this clock. It kind of gives me a,
It keeps you there. It
Yeah.
keeps you on track.
all right. So nature at its best. You go into the conservation department, and again, you don't want to spend a little bit of time here. You want to try to get as much information as you can. What you're going to find out is, boy, do we not know anything about conservation.
Right.
Right. Every time I just walk by the conservation, I learn something walking by. You know, is it wetlands? Is it conservation land? Is it protected? You know, can you use it? There are protected wetlands that you can use because the town has taken the proper steps in order to allow us to do that. You know, some have installed bridges or docks or decking that allows you to, you know, to explore and enjoy the nature. They don't want to just, you know, slap a stamp on there and say it's conservation, stay out. You know, they want us to enjoy the beauty. But how does this affect us as real estate salespeople, right? You need to, in essence, check and make sure there's not any protected vegetation or protected species on or around the property. I remember this beautiful new subdivision. The house was gorgeous. My clients loved it. But if it wasn't for the small turtles that you couldn't even see, it was unbelievable. They would not allow you to put up a fence because of the turtles. If you were going to put up a fence, it had to be a post and rail fence.
A turtle fence?
Yeah, it was friendly to the turtles. So it was funny. My buyer says to the conservation agent, now, why wouldn't you allow me to protect the turtles by fencing in my property so that they don't get run over in the street by a car? And they said, well, that's nature. If the turtle wanders into the street and they get run over by a car, that's the circle of life, you know? Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
I see them, yeah, we have them in Byfield, they're everywhere.
yeah, you just, are there protected species? You know, it really is crazy what you're gonna learn. And, you know, I'm glad that my clients agreed to go with me because they didn't buy the house.
Yeah.
They didn't buy the house because, you know, they had little children and they said, well, if we can't put up a fence, there's a significant drop down from the property.
Yeah.
And they thought their kid could get hurt, you know, but if they had a fence, they would have been fine.
Yeah.
You know, so they even had rules that you could not disturb any trees that had fallen unless the tree had fallen on a structure or onto so many feet from the protected vegetation. You couldn't touch the tree.
Yeah.
So if you had a windstorm and trees blew down, you couldn't clean it up. You know, so you really just got to spend the time, guys, going through these departments and saying, hit me with it. You know, tell me whatever I need to know. If I buy this house, am I going to be able to enjoy myself, or am I going to be cursing and, you know, writing letters and wishing that I never bought this place? So when you're a realtor, yeah, exactly. How come you didn't tell me? You should have known. And guys, when we're buyer's agents, it's our job to tell the buyer what they should inquire about. The buyers don't know what they don't know. It's our job to tell them what they don't know. Okay, can't stress that enough. Flood zones, if you have an area that's in a flood zone, or maybe it's close to a flood zone, you know, and FEMA loves to redraft their maps all the time. So, you know, you just got to kind of pay attention to these things. Underground aquifers, you've got underground water streams, you've got all kinds of things going on. Water table, you might not be able to put a septic system in a property because the water table is too high. Or maybe you can, but you've got to put in a raised septic system. Okay, well, now I'm going to have this big, huge mound or mill out my backyard. Do I want to invite people over for a cookout to look at a mound, you know, with a candy cane and a turtle? Yeah. The treasurer's department, you know, when you walk into the treasury department, you, believe it or not, you can find out whether the current homeowner is having financial troubles or not. How? Well, have they paid their taxes? Believe it or not, a lot of people pay their own taxes. Not every bank requires tax escrows. You know, if you put down a substantial amount of money, some banks allow the homeowners the option to pay their own taxes. Okay, so you can find out that information. You can find out whether there's any betterments or special assessments. What's a special assessment? What's a betterment? Well, you could have sewer installed in your street.
Well,
Now,
in Plum Island, it was huge.
okay, in Plum Island, yeah. What was, do you remember what they were charging
I
people?
think it was like 45,000.
Wow.
20, something like, I mean, huge, but it was over, they could pay for it in 20 years.
20 years. I was gonna say, it's
Yeah.
gotta be a long
Yeah,
payout.
it
Yeah,
was huge.
yeah.
Um,
You know, and then when the town, if there are special assessments or there are betterments that are levied against the property, will those have to be paid at time of closing,
Right,
or can they continue?
exactly.
You know, so you've got to know that so that you disclose it to the prospective buyer. And if you're on the seller side, you want to make sure the seller is aware of that. Why? Well, that's going to affect their equity position. And us for disclosures. Okay. But generally speaking, a special assessment could come from a town meeting. Maybe the meeting was such that they voted to, you know, raise capital because they needed to put a new program in the schools, or, you know, they needed something.
And the
So
roads,
needed
the
new roads.
sidewalk.
Yeah. Betterments are typically given to properties that are specifically improved,
Mhm.
where a special assessment is typically town-wide. Or it could be a district or a zone if only they are going to benefit by it.
Right.
Okay. Tax benefits, well, or tax abatement. Can I file a tax abatement? What's the period of time that my purchaser can actually abate the assessed real estate taxes? Believe it or not, they have a window, and you have to follow that window.
And what exactly is an abatement?
An abatement is you're challenging the assessed value. You're saying, I call your bluff. I think it's worth less. And then you have to go and you have to provide evidence, which is comparable sales. Now, here's a key. You have to know which fiscal year are they actually using data on. It's not the current fiscal year, it's usually the prior fiscal year. So if you submit comparable sales for the wrong time, they automatically get pushed out. Yeah, so they're gonna deny your request for abatement because you didn't provide sufficient data. Or they're gonna say, no, you didn't provide sufficient data.
So here's a question, what, if any relevance does the appraisal that you just got on your home have to do with the town's assessment?
Good question. Can you guys all hear Kathy when she asked the question? Can you all hear what Kathy just asked? I can only see one person.
I could not hear her.
Yes.
You cannot. Kate,
I can't unmute.
so Kate was asked, I'm sorry, Kathy. I'm looking at Kate, but I said,
It's okay.
Kathy was asking during the time frame that we're in now where we have appraisals, if you have an appraisal that doesn't come in at sale price, how does that affect your assessment or?
Or these crazy appraisals. I mean,
Or
your
crazy
Your
appraisals.
home is appraised so much now. The new buyer coming in,
Yeah,
the assessed value on that property, say, could be 350.
yep, could be 350.
Now the appraisal's done and it comes in at $1 million.
Mhm. I don't-
Any relevance or significance to the town and the appraiser? And
So, yes, I don't think so.
I don't think so.
My understanding is that the way the state wants the town to assess is based on fair market value,
Right,
because they want the most raised through property owners. But we all know that most of the assessed values are not fair
Not
market
even
value,
close.
not even close. So they've got their own calculation,
Yeah.
you know, which they're never gonna make us aware of naturally. I don't think it would have that much of an effect, because it's not like that report goes back to the town.
Right.
They'll see the sale prices.
Sooner or later, though, the towns are probably
Yeah,
gonna catch up with
yeah.
the fact that
Yep.
all of the property in that town is probably has gone up 15-20% over the last year.
Right, right. They
Maybe, I don't know.
they should see those increases.
Right.
Yeah, and the state's gonna be mad at them if they're under assessing,
Correct.
you know, so they're saying you need to raise more capital by charging actual value.
Not something you need to bring up.
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
Just curious.
Right, right. But I will tell you that a lot of people do get denied from tax abatements because they didn't file at the right time, or they used the data from the wrong fiscal year. All right, so that's important. Anybody have any questions on that? Am I talking too much?
No,
All right. DPW, Department of Public Works.
You're so good, they have no
Well,
You're so
sure, sure, okay. All right, so the DPW, Department of Public Works, these guys, they work hard. Guys, gals,
Amen.
they all work very hard. But how does this affect the homeowner? How does this affect us as real estate agents? Well, do they have trash removal? Is the trash removal included in the tax bill, or are they assessed an additional amount every year? I pay $200 a year in trash removal on top of my real estate taxes. Okay. How would I know that unless I went to the treasurer's office and the DPW's office? What about recycling? If I don't put out my recycling bins, they don't take my trash. Honestly, I can put out an empty recycling bin and then they'll take my trash. But if I do not include, if I don't put the recycle bin out there, they don't take, they go right by you. And I know that because I was chasing the guy when he went right by me. All right. So you need to ask those questions. What day of the week is recycling on? Again, some of this isn't just to cover your butt, but other part of it is to educate the consumer, let the buyer know, you know, winter restrictions. Can I park my car on the street? If there's very little parking in the property that you're selling and people are relying on having the street as parking, they might have an issue. You know, that's something that people have been bit in the butt before, especially when you're talking about Boston and the suburbs. All right. The school superintendent, do they have kids? Are they planning on having kids?
Yeah, programs.
If they have kids, what type of programs are available? Do they have special needs? Are there special needs programs available for their kids' needs? We can't answer this, guys. We just have to bring the people to the source and let them say, geez, you know, my son or my daughter has this trouble. Do you have services? English as a second language, ESL, or I forget the abbreviation there, but there are certain programs that communities offer, which is wonderful. It makes them desirable. But we don't want to be steering people towards particular programs. We just want to educate them, make them aware of what's available for them. Buses. Do the buses come and pick up my kids, or do I got to drop them off at school every day? If you're somebody who has to be to work at 7 a.m. and your kid's school doesn't start till after that, now you're going to have to find yourself a babysitter or somebody else to put the kids on the bus. Again, these are all factors that you're going to think about. I want to be in a certain school district, or I want to be a member of this particular elementary school. Well, is the house in the district? What actual area comprises the district? If I want to be in the Pingree school system, where is that? All right, so that when you're doing your map search, which we're going to talk about next week, you're going to see that you can actually stretch out the map and search a very particular area. And that's exactly why you want to know that, so that you can say, okay, my client wants to buy property in this district. So these are the margins that I can work within. All right. As far as the planning board, this is a great department to visit too, because they're going to tell you what's going on in the town. Are they planning on building?
40Bs,
What's that?
40B.
40B, yeah, 40B communities. Are there any planned or pending 40B communities? Yep, which is affordable housing communities. You want to find out whether the neighbor has plans to build this monstrosity of a garage that's going to block the sun.
Right.
And you think you got all this beautiful sunlight in your backyard. Well, not next week.
Or if McDonald's is coming to town.
Yeah, McDonald's, exactly. Whoop. Sorry, I advanced too quickly. You know, there's different Superfund sites. You know, are they going to repurpose the Superfund sites once they're cleaned up? Are there any planned subdivisions? Do you think that beautiful meadow that you're looking out in the morning is going to stay beautiful, or is it going to be all new construction next year? All right. And you can actually, yeah,
We just bulldoze that whole road half of it down.
Ipswich on Limebrook.
Limebrook,
Wow.
tons
Yeah.
of Limebrook, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So these are all those little things. You can go to the town, if you're a town meeting, you can go to the town meeting. You can go to the planning board's meetings as a member of the public. And sometimes they're open meetings where you can actually ask questions and join in discussion. Other times they're closed meetings where you can only attend, but you can't actually say anything. So does the individual want to get involved in the PTA? I forgot to mention that about when you're talking about the school systems. Are there after-school programs? Is there daycare? Is there pre-K programs? Again, these are all factors that I don't have that on the slide. I apologize, but I know that's a big concern for parents that have younger kids. They don't know if there's pre-K programs or if there's daycare or early childhood type programs. So these are all places that you want to visit. Recreation department. Hopefully the town has a recreation department. Some towns that are smaller, they really don't have much to call recreation. My town has a playground, has a pool, tennis courts, basketball courts, a park, a gazebo. They got all kinds of stuff. Is that free or do I got to pay for it? What programs are free? What's that? Oh, it's in the taxes. Yeah. Yeah, it's in the taxes, but some of the programs that they offer are extra costs, and that does help with parenting if you're short on your daycare and you need a place for your child to go after school. Okay. Anybody have any questions so far? No. Am I really?
Scott,
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
obviously, these are great resources.
Yeah.
How would you determine what questions to ask? Would you interview your buyer and see what interest they have and then chase all this information around? I mean, obviously, you're not going to take your buyer down to every department at town hall. So how would you recommend implementing a strategy to get the right information?
Yeah, Jim, I mean, great question. I actually like to go to every department. I mean, some departments you're going to spend more time in because it's related to the property, others you won't. But you bring up a good point. You could do a informational type meeting that says, okay, what are all the key points that we want to hit? If you run out of time, because you could spend all day at
Yeah.
town hall trying to do this, so it probably would be a good way to, let's put down our priorities on paper and make sure we get the answers to these questions, before we do any other extra research.
I know once you go through town once on like the higher, like the DPW stuff, and
Yeah,
the schools, you've got that information, right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
don't
I
have to
mean,
keep going back necessarily.
well, it depends on how many
That's
towns
true.
you're operating
Yeah.
in.
No,
Yeah,
right, for sure.
yeah. And has any of the information changed?
Yeah.
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 So I like your idea, Jim. Yes, I think it'd be great to put down the priorities first. Let's get these taken care of. How much time do you have to actually spend at town hall? But I, like Kathy, like to go one office to the next and just make sure I don't forget to turn any stones.
Yeah, nobody likes to buy a new house and have 3 weeks of trash piled up out front.
That's right.
Exactly.
You don't know what day they come.
Exactly. So talking about new versus old house, here's an interesting thought. What could you get at the fire department? I mean, aside from a lollipop and,
Yeah, right. Pat the Dalmatian.
pat the Dalmatian if they have one. Yeah.
Ring the bell.
Ring the bell. Yeah. Ride on the pole. I mean, that actually could be a worthy visit anyway, but you want to ask them for records of past visits. Has there been any evidence of fires in the past? Has there been any damage? I remember looking at one particular property that was built in the 60s, and it had only been a couple of years old, and it had a major fire. And I forget what the dollar amount of the damage was, but it was so substantial. It was just unbelievable that during the 60s it cost that much. So my client looked at that and said, wow, that was a pretty extensive amount of damage. And there was still evidence that a lot of those pieces of wood were still there. You know, and that brings up another point. If you're not already doing this, make sure you go into the attic. Make sure you pull down those stairs and peek your head up there. Yeah, and then get down and let your client do the same thing so they can see what you're looking at. You know, obviously if you're looking in the attic and you see all kinds of black mold on the sheathing, we're not mold inspectors, but I might say, you know what? I'm not a mold guy, but that looks like mold to me. We might want to make sure we include a mold inspection. Or it might be enough to scare the buyer and they'll just be like, see you later. Okay. But my point here about the fire department is, aside from all that fun you can have, you definitely want to inquire to see if there was ever any fire damage and you know, one thing I didn't put on here that's really probably a pretty good idea: Google the address.
Yeah.
Google the address. You can find out a lot. You know, I found out one of our clients was going through a nasty divorce because when I Googled the address, the police report captured their address and it said domestic, you know, so there's all kinds of stuff going on that I found out just by Googling. So, you know, it's literally, it's a whole day doing all your research. The police department, hopefully you don't have a warrant out for your arrest, or hopefully your client doesn't have a warrant out for their arrest. Kathy might not want to go into the police department. She might want to stay a little far away. But you want to inquire, you know, do you feel safe? What's the sex offender registry saying? Are there any sex offenders that are living and or working in town? If so, where are they located? Naturally, before they provide this information, they're going to make you sign a waiver or something that indicates that you're not going to use this information against the sex offenders, or harm or, you know, cause any mischief that you shouldn't be. But in general, you want the buyer to feel that they can ask, is this a safe neighborhood?
Yeah.
If I'm out walking with my kids by myself, or I'm out walking by myself, am I going to have an issue? You know, what's your feeling? And sometimes the police officers won't respond. Sometimes they'll say,
Yeah.
I think you're fine.
Yeah.
So I always say to the buyer, if you get that answer, put it on them. Say, if your daughter
Oh my God, yeah.
if your daughter was walking at night, would you allow her to walk in this neighborhood? Sometimes they don't have to say anything. You can look at their facial reaction and figure out what they really want to tell you. Okay. I remember selling a property to a guy. We did this. We went and did all of our due diligence, and we went to the police department. No problems whatsoever. 2 weeks after closing, there was a drive-by shooting at the house right next door to the property that I sold. 2 weeks later.
Sure. Yeah, you never know.
But thank God we went to the police department and we asked those questions.
Right.
Because, you know, they might have been like, hey, Scott, you didn't tell me about the drive-by shootings that happen on a regular basis. It turns out that
Is that a problem?
yeah, it turns out that the drive-by shooting was actually not meant for that particular property. It was the boyfriend of the girl who lived there. Yeah. So you just got to do what you got to do to protect your clients, you know. You know what's not a bad idea either? Go knock on doors.
Oh, God.
Anybody do door knocking?
I used to all the time.
Are there any door knockers out there?
Actually, I still am.
Go knock on the neighbors' doors. I mean, granted, COVID, you might get looked at a little weird with COVID and all that, but if you
Yes.
start knocking on the doors, ask the neighbors. The neighbors will tell you everything. They will tell you everything. In fact, I had a neighbor one time. The neighbor said, we went over and knocked on the door, and the neighbor said, did they tell you about the water in the basement?
Right, I love that, right?
I was like, what?
Yeah.
I said, well, they told us they've never had water. He's like, that guy's, did you see the sump pump? I'm like, no, they didn't even disclose the sump pump. And we didn't see the sump pump. They had it all blocked. They had boxes around it. Yeah. Talk to the neighbors. The neighbors, well, I shouldn't say they never lie. Sometimes the neighbors, yeah. Yeah, they make up stories. Yeah. Okay, so community services, believe it or not, some of you, if you didn't know this, they'll install your baby seat at the police department. So if you're a new parent or your clients are new parents and you're afraid that you're not going to install it properly, the police department will allow you to, they'll do it for you. If for some reason you feel that you need to take any self-defense classes, some police departments will offer that as a free service to their community. Mace use, maybe you want to purchase a firearm or mace or pepper spray or whatever you want to use if you feel that need. A lot of times the towns offer those services, and sometimes they're free and other times they might charge you for it. But these are all things you've got to keep in mind when you're doing your due diligence. Okay. Council on Aging. Well, we've all got parents that are elderly or grandparents, and maybe they're going to come stay with us in the in-law that's illegal or not illegal, who knows. What type of services are available for the aging? Do they have programs that they can go play bingo and Twister? Can you imagine the elderly doing Twister? I think that would be a lot of fun. Pickleball. So you've really got to just inquire. Veterans Affairs, if you got somebody who's a veteran and he's using VA financing, he or she, you'd want to make sure that they're familiar with what type of services the town offers for that member who served. All right. All right, so we're going to end, I hate to say this, we're going to end this discussion with talk about private septic systems in Title V. For those of you who don't know, that if your system is not a city sewer, then it means you have a private sewage or septic system. And everybody needs to be aware of how to take care of these properties. This is just a slide that I use when I'm teaching the pre-license class, just to give you a little bit of general knowledge. But we all know that if it is on a private septic system, then the seller traditionally is the party that pays for a Title V inspection. Hopefully, they're going to get a passing status. If for some reason they don't and they get a fail, well, that's not good. There's obviously some work that's going to need to be done there. Hopefully, if you didn't get a passing status, then you got something that says conditional pass, which usually just means it's a simple repair, and other than that, it'll be just fine. But if you have a system that's being upgraded or you have a brand new house, they're going to give you a certificate of compliance that says that it meets the current Title V regulations. Okay, the certificates are good for 2 years. Now, if you pump your system every year, some towns will extend that to 3 years. Let me preface that. Yeah, for Title V inspections. Some towns, not every town, will extend it from 2 to 3 years that certification is good for. So you do want to inquire and make sure that you understand what the town is that you're doing. Incidentally, transfers between family members are not considered to be a third-party transfer, so you do not need a Title V inspection when you're selling it to a family member. That's something that you may not have heard from a licensing class. Anytime financing is involved in the purchase and a Title V is needed, the bank is going to want to see a passing Title V. Well, if you're in New England, like we are, and what was it, 10 years ago that we got like 100 inches of snow, a ridiculous amount of snow we got. All these banks were not allowing closings because we couldn't access the Title V to be able to inspect it. And then once all that snow melted, everybody's systems were flooded with water and their leaching fields were all mushy and, you know.
We have a question from Amanda that wants to know why Title V's aren't required when you're passing within the same family.
Yeah, the great question, Amanda. So why are Title V's not required when you're passing within the family? I don't know what the law or the logic was behind that. The only thing I think is that the logic is you're not going to probably screw over your family members. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's hilarious.
Well, I mean, what other logic
No,
would
yeah,
apply, you
yeah.
know? It's technically, it's a transfer. Whenever you transfer a property, you're supposed to do a Title V, but for whatever reason, they allowed that provision. And the only thing I can think of is that they would think you wouldn't take advantage of your family member, you know, unless you have those types of family members that you want to take advantage of. So,
I had I'm searching for Middlesex County, especially for a buyer. There were a lot of MLS listings that said Title V not done. Like, I don't understand, or to be done by closing. Is that a strategy or something? Or are they
it's a strategy. It's a very poor strategy.
Yeah.
So the seller, so the question is, when you see MLS and it says Title V not completed yet, or to be completed prior to closing, is it a strategy? Yes, and as I indicated, it's a very poor one by the seller because they're trying to delay putting out the funds. A lot of times the sellers say, well, I only get 2 years to have my Title V certificate good for. I don't want to chew up that time during the marketing. No, you want to save the money is what it is. The problem is if you allow them to wait,
Yeah.
you're marketing the home, you're spending all your time and your money, then you find out the system fails, and now they're not moving because they have no equity, right? So I would require or make it a recommendation, if not a requirement, that they inspect within 10 days or prior to listing it. You know, why do I want to spend my time and money if you're not willing to spend yours on the Title V that you're supposed to do?
Are they hoping that the buyer will pay for it?
Maybe, you know, maybe there's some
Just
hopes that the
strike a
buyer
deal.
would pay. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? And to be honest, if you're on the buyer side of the equation, nothing says that the buyer can't get their own Title V inspection done. You know, they normally don't because they don't want to spend the money. Yeah.
Selling it has failed, and I would guess that's the money issue there too.
Well, and nothing says the Title V has to pass in order to transfer the property.
But you have 2 years.
But
You have
can't
2
with a
years.
loan.
If you have a loan,
Yeah,
chances
maybe.
are you're not. Exactly. Exactly.
Cash.
Yep. So you're going to have your 2-year time frame that you would have to, and the 2 years, by the way, is not an automatic. If the Board of Health deems it to be an immediate health issue,
Yeah.
they're going to say you got 60 days, you know, because they're not going to let 2 years go by with all that contamination. So when you're looking at the financing, most lenders are going to want that to be done prior to closing. Naturally, it's the discretion of the lender. Typically, if you're putting down 20% or greater, the lender might use their discretion and may say, we'll allow an escrow holdback, which usually includes 1.5 times of the cost to replace a septic system. And the purpose behind that holdback is to allow the transaction to go through, knowing that the buyer has a fair amount of equity and the chances of them walking away from the property are slim. So the lender feels some comfort in that. But it is the discretion of the lender, you know, whether they allow that to close prior. As far as an addendum to add to a contingency, this is one thing I just personally do myself. I had a situation where when I was trained 27, I can't even believe it's been 27 years. When I was, sorry guys, I was having a relapse moment.
Yeah.
When I was trained 27 years ago.
You talk so much, you're like, you're almost done.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at the clock going, all right, I got to get all this in.
I know you're right.
So when I was trained so long ago, the person who trained me just said right in the contingencies, subject to Title V passing. So that's exactly what I wrote. Well, that's exactly what the seller gave us, was a passing Title V. Well, let me show you if you look at the bottom right picture here,
Mm,
you're gonna see a raised or mounded system.
mhm.
This is exactly what they delivered us.
Oh,
Now, they
God.
didn't
They
tell
didn't
us.
know you're getting them out.
We had no idea.
Right.
And the seller did not breach the agreement.
Right.
They delivered a
Yeah.
passing Title V,
Yeah.
right? So what I've done is learn the hard way. Hopefully this doesn't happen to you. Thankfully, the people didn't sue me. They became really good friends, and I've since done multiple transactions for them. But I use this language and I write this in. Subject to buyer's review and approval of any septic repair, replacement, or modification plan.
Yeah.
What does that mean? If it's not going to be exactly what it is right now, it's subject to my review and approval. I've actually had probably a half a dozen clients walk away from properties because that clause was in there. It protected them and they didn't lose any money because it was a known fact. Hey, if you're going to give me a mounted system, I want the option to walk. How much of a mound, how much of a raised system is it going to be? I've had some clients actually still proceed because it wasn't that bad. You know, a slight increase was no big deal. But some of these septic systems, you'll see retaining walls. Like these
Yeah.
bad boys are 5-6 feet above the ground, and there's no making that look pretty. I mean, I don't care who you are. It's just not. So that's a particular clause. Obviously, you'd want to check with your team leader to make sure that if you're going to add provisions to your contract, that they're comfortable with the wording and or adage of that particular provision. This is just something that in the past I've done myself. And then one last tip I will give you in my flurry of board here is that you should contact the Board of Health and ask them, is there an approved list of septic inspectors? Every town has the option to decide whether they're going to have an actual list of authorized or approved
Right.
inspections. If there is one and your Title V inspector is not on that list, the Board of Health is not going to accept that Title V report. Yeah, so it's very specific to every town. Some towns don't care, some really do. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and give you a quick little run through, and let me give you that CYA disclaimer that I love using all the time. I'm not a septic guy. This is explained to me, so I thought I would communicate it to you. But the basic working of a system, if you look at the top left chart here, you'll see inside the house you got your toilet. When you flush, everything goes down the drain. Oh, you know what? I'm gonna annotate so you can see my cursor. How's that? All right, and I do see a question. Okay, so everything goes down the toilet, down the drain, into the septic, right? So it goes in here into what they call an inlet pipe. And then everything will drop down, all the sludge, the bad stuff goes to the bottom. Your clear water stays in the middle. And then you also have your liquid and you have your scum levels up here. And as glorious of a job this is, the actual inspector has to measure all of these levels. Okay. And then the clear water will exit through the outlet pipe. As it goes out the outlet pipe, it goes to this box called the distribution box, or they refer to it as a D box, which is basically a miniature septic. And it's meant to catch any effluents that escaped from the septic tank itself. So sometimes the inspector might actually have to pump the D box as well. And then all of the clear water goes into these perforated PVC pipes, which are laid down into gravel pits. And then the clear water ends up going through the gravel, the sand, the dirt, and it cleans itself before it returns back into the water system. And then the whole cycle repeats itself once again, okay? As far as the septic tank itself, when you look at it from the ground, this is how it looks, the bottom left picture. Typically, you'll see they have two covers. Sometimes the conditional passing might be because it needs a riser, where they don't want individuals to have to dig too deep in order to uncover those tanks covers. So they'll require that they install a riser. And that's just based on their Board of Health requirements. This picture in the bottom middle is a picture of a basic cesspool. And a basic cesspool doesn't have a D box and it doesn't have a leaching field. This big area that I was showing you with the gravel and the PVC piping, that's all called the leaching field. So the cesspool is a very basic version of a septic disposal system, and they can be pumped. Now, what's interesting in Massachusetts, you would think that these were all failed, but in the Cape, they actually have cesspools that are permitted. Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of towns, it's an automatic failure if it has a cesspool, but in general, that's going to be the case. Now, when you look at this mounded system over here in the bottom right, you think, why did they do that? Was it cheaper? No, it's actually more expensive. They only did it because they didn't have a choice. Maybe the groundwater table has risen and their septic would be sitting in the water table, and that's not permitted. So, or their leaching field could be too close. So they have to either raise the system or maybe just part of the system to be above the grade. All right. One other fact I forgot to mention here was, let me see, if city sewer is available, then and your system fails, they're going to require you to connect to city sewer. Yeah, they're not going to allow you to fix the system. They're going to say you have to tie right into
And
the
that's could be a hefty charge.
hefty charge. Yeah, a lot of money, Anybody got any questions?
I'm not sure what Amanda.
Oh, Amanda's question here. Why isn't it required? Amanda, what is it? I'm sorry, what is it that you're referring to? Oh, Kathy answered it already.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, so I've covered everything that I was going to go over. I'm sorry that I talked way too
Well,
much.
you
and
left us on a crappy note.
I left you on a
No
crappy note.
pun
I left you on a crappy note. Yeah, the funniest septic company I've ever seen was what did it say? The Kakasaka. That was the name of the company.
Oh, God.
Right on the side of the
Actually, I do
truck.
have a question. So you
Yeah.
mentioned that you should check with the Board of Health for approved
List. Yeah.
list of inspectors.
Title V inspectors. Yep.
Do they have a approved list of installers?
Usually
Hmm.
it's the same people. It's
So before anybody gets into a client,
right.
make sure.
Right. You want your client to know it's not just go call the cheapest guy.
Right,
You make sure you're using people who are on the approved list.
because they
Yeah.
may not necessarily tell
Exactly. Yeah. Anybody got any questions? I know I threw a lot at you. All
Is
right.
there anything about town sewer, like the piping in an antique house? Anything about the connections to the road that, like if they're cast iron today or anything that a homeowner is gonna signal, I don't like the looks of that?
Yeah, I mean, the town sewer department could say they're the ones who have to certify whether the current materials are okay or not.
Mhm.
You know, some of that piping, I've seen lead piping
Mhm.
and cast iron materials that are not in good shape, and
Right.
but typically the town is the one who's going to say what satisfies their
Mhm.
requirements.
But they're not gonna come in and look at that.
No,
But
no.
typically they get flagged if you have an issue with your.
You have a
water
leak.
supply.
Yeah.
Okay.
But that kind of goes back to when you're attending your home inspections.
Yeah.
Listen to what they say,
Yeah.
because when they look at the sewer pipe, they'll say there's all kinds of
Yeah.
pitting,
Yes.
and they'll tell you that you can see the sewage coming through the pipe.
Right.
And again, because I wouldn't know what knob and tube wiring looked like unless I went to an inspection and heard it 100 times.
The only things, because you just brought that up, which is a great point, the only other things that are on here is that there are some, like going to the water department
Water department,
and
yeah.
going to the electric company if it serves the town, like Ipswich.
Oh, yes,
Right,
yep.
municipal.
So we might want
Yep.
to throw like a
That's right.
municipal.
Municipal
Service.
utilities
right.
or,
Because
yeah.
I know Ipswich is the only one I know of. There's probably others. The water
Middletown,
department
Yeah.
has to sign off.
Hello. We stopped moving over
Wow,
here, so the
probably
power
did.
went off.
The water department has, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, there we go.
The water department has to sign off.
Wow,
On
water
the
department
old-
signs. Yeah, and
They
the,
actually come out and they look at, I think, and because I've sold houses and I've lived there.
yeah,
And what I recall is they're looking at septic tie-ins to the sewer system.
yeah, yeah, and you bring up another good point too, that I wanted to make some references to too. If somebody has a hot water tank that's rented, make sure that gets disclosed, because I actually had to buy somebody a hot water tank. I didn't realize that it was rented. I thought that was something that they did away with, but they still do rented tanks.
Yeah.
Propane companies used to, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Fuel lines, a lot of the fire departments, when they're doing their smoke detector inspections, they're also looking to make sure that the fuel line has a protective sleeve over it. Some fire departments don't care. They don't care once, at all, but we want to make our clients aware that, you might need to change out the fuel line, call the fire department, see if they care. If they do, let's do it now.
Mm.
We should
Because-
add that to them.
Yeah,
Did you
Yeah.
share your presentation?
I didn't put it online, but I will.
But there's, such great information
yeah,
about
that's
what
right.
you're
Yeah.
asking for.
And did you say something about knob and tube, like in an as-is house sale, knob and tube? Is the city gonna enter into some formal discussion of that?
So you used a couple terms, the term as is.
Yeah.
So just realize that if you say as is, or your client says as is, that doesn't relieve you of the duty of disclosure.
Okay, so you
All right.
just.
Yeah, you can't,
electrical, you say knob and tube, and leave it at that.
yes, if you know that there is knob and tube,
Yep.
then you would want to
On the
disclose it
sales statement.
on the seller's
Okay.
disclosure statement. And how you could identify it, if you've never seen knob and tube, Google knob and tube wiring, and it will
Okay.
show you actually how it
Like
looks.
Wires coming into it.
Yeah, it's like a
Oh,
little
I've
knob
seen
and a
the little
wire.
glass things, yeah, it's in the fuse box.
Yeah.
Yeah, or you may actually
see
see
the
a light switch that's two buttons you have to push in to shut off
Oh,
and
yeah,
turn
yeah.
on.
I do have that.
Yeah,
The problem is you can't get insurance typically. If
fuse
that's-
boxes are a problem too.
Right.
Yeah, if you have a property that's on fuses and not circuit breakers, some insurance companies don't want to insure against that.
This is why we're getting sued,
Yeah,
because they can't
Yeah.
insure the house.
Oh,
Right.
okay, so I have this type of house on a delayed listing. I did see, okay, I'll ask you a few
Okay,
questions.
all right.
does anybody have any questions? I know we only have like literally 4 minutes, which that's not bad.
You did a good job.
I know it.
Usually I run out of time.
No, that's why I always have to put that up to keep myself on.
All right. Well, I won't keep you all. If you guys are all good and you don't have any questions, then,
You can say adios.
yeah, adios. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, great information. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
very
Jim.
good.
Thank you.
Oh, that's you, not me.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.